So now that we've talked about how to model audit risk at the assertion level, let's talk about how auditors actually go about um, assessing that risk and determining how they need to respond. And this process is called the risk assessment process. So this is an overview of what that process looks like, but it begins with auditors performing a variety of procedures to obtain an understanding of the entity and its environment. So what type of entity is it? Is it for profit, nonprofit? So questions like that. What industry is it in? And so therefore what regulations are they subject to? What is the overall objective of this corporation or of this organization? What strategies have they chosen? Stuff like that. What are the performance measures? We've talked about how earnings targets can be very important for management. And so, understanding those is going to help us understand the pressure points and risk areas, and then internal control. And so, in obtaining our understanding of the entity, our goal is to figure out okay, what risks are present, what risks can the company control, and what can they not control, and then ultimately, how have they responded to those risks. And so that's part of that internal control piece. And so we're going to identify the risks that could lead to a material misstatement, evaluate the entity's response, and then finally, we're going to respond with our audit procedures. So we've found the inherent risks, we've determined the response, that's the control risk, and then now we're going to respond through detection risk. So this is the overview of the process, but actually, what procedures do auditors do? Well, here's a list. So the first might be they talk to management, they talk to the board of directors, maybe the audit committee. They're going to read board minutes, and that's going to give them just an idea of what's going on within the entity. What is the general attitude and the tone of what's going on? Analytical procedures. This is maybe looking at financial ratios, looking at account balance changes from the current year to the prior year. These are called preliminary analytical procedures, and they are required during this phase of the audit. We might do observation where we watch procedures happen, and then we inspect documents to make sure that those documents were prepared according to how the controls prescribed. And then we're going to be required to have a discussion among the engagement team to specifically talk about fraud and what we know about what's going on in the organization, and just kind of discuss all of this information to make sure that everybody's on the same page. And so that fraud discussion I'll actually talk about in a later video. So all of this is going to provide us with information about how to respond. And so the goal, like I mentioned, is to assess the risk of material misstatements, so control risk and inherent risk, at the relevant assertion level to determine what audit procedures are necessary. Okay, so how do we specifically need to respond to this specific assertion in this specific account? And I'm going to give you a specific example later in this video. And so we're going to figure out what procedures do we need to provide reasonable assurance to achieve our planned or acceptable level of audit risk. Okay, so that's the goal. I need to understand exactly what's happening in this account, what risks are there related to the assertion that management is making, so that I can figure out what I need to do to provide reasonable assurance. And so the process looks something like this. If we have our audit risk model, the first thing we're going to set is audit risk. That's set at the engagement level. It's influenced by who's using the financial statements, what is the strength of the organization, what do we know about management. Okay, then we're going to assess the risk of material misstatement, and that looks like determining the risk of what could go wrong in the company. And so that's inherent risk. Okay, so just things that could happen, and then how effective is the client's response through their controls and other risk evaluations. And then finally, we determine our response, that's our detection risk, and we plan appropriate procedures that are going to provide us with sufficient and appropriate evidence that provide us with the ability to provide reasonable assurance. Okay, and so that's our response to the risk of material misstatement. So what might this actually look like? Here's an example of Apple. So if you were charged with auditing Apple, The first step would be to gain an understanding of the client's business and its industry. Well, we know that Apple is a tech company. They design, they manufacture, and they market mobile communication and media devices, personal computers, and digital music players. They actually do so much more, right? There's a couple of other things that aren't quite captured in this, but we know it's a tech company. Okay, so we understand the main objectives that they have. We know that they're in the tech world, so there's going to be some regulation there. We know that there's some risks with tech because stuff can become obsolete. And so we've got to think through all of those things, like what could go wrong after we've gained this understanding of the client's business and its industry. This is a global company, so okay, we're working not just in the US economy, but the global economy. And so, what specific business risks are associated with the fact that they're a global tech company? Well, global markets for the company products and services are highly competitive. Okay, everybody's competing. They are not the only ones providing smartphones in the market. Technology changes. And so, all of those factors determine how Apple operates. So, the third step is going to be to assess the risk of material misstatement. That second point there on determining client business risks is just the credit risk that Apple faces with the sales. They actually offer their own credit card, and so not only are they a tech company, but they are also engaging in credit transactions. And so, what specific risks of material misstatement actually exist? Okay, so we need to translate these business risks into actual risks for the financial statements. Well, I've sort of alluded to the fact that technology can go obsolete. So Apple needs to be very careful that their technology and inventory specifically does not become obsolete. If they have a high level of old Apple watches, people don't want that. If they have a bunch of iPhone 6s laying around, those really are not that desired now that newer and better models have been produced. And so, one of the specific assertion level risks that Apple auditors need to be aware of is the valuation of inventory and whether or not it's actually obsolete. Okay, and so how would auditors actually respond? Well, they're going to be doing a lot of testing around the inventory to make sure that it's properly valued. Okay, so that's how this process works. I get an understanding, I figure out what the specific risks are, I translate them to the assertion level for all of my various accounts, and then I determine what I need to do to respond. Okay, so they're going to do specific testing around the valuation. So that's an overview of the risk assessment process and how auditors would actually go about figuring out how to respond to the risks they see at their clients.